So what is next? So we got some hardware, we got some BIOS in it, and now next is we need to install the operating system. So a little bit about what is an operating system. So we'll revisit this particular concept of operating system throughout this training, one way or the other. But here, this is probably the first introductory explanation for operating system. So it's a software at the end of the day. It's a very complex piece of software, probably most complex piece of software in the planet could be an operating system. One of the most complex software available in the planet could be an operating system easily, with millions of lines of code and stuff like that. It is loaded by the BIOS, so it is loaded from one of the secondary storage and loaded into the memory. So loading normally means that copying something from the secondary storage to the primary storage. Primary storage is the RAM or the memory.
Question.
Yep.
Is it done every time when you switch on the computer?
Exactly true. Every time you switch on the computer, the operating system is getting loaded from the disk to the memory. That's correct. Because why? Because the data in the memory is volatile. When you power off the computer, the memory is getting wiped out, or the data in the memory we cannot trust any longer. So that's why every time when you boot, it's getting loaded into the memory. Very good question. And what is inside operating system? It is nothing but instructions to the CPU. Rather complex instructions, I would say. Not the kind of instruction a typical program like Word or Excel executes. So there are different sets of system programming is done in the operating system. So that is the kind of instruction which is being executed by the operating system. But it is instructions to the CPU. So we will see more about this in chapter 3 of this course. What are the CPU instructions and how to handle them. So operating system allow us to easily interact with complicated devices like CPU and memory. We're going to see a specification of a modern CPU. In fact, it is the specification of the exact same CPU which we installed, the AMD CPU. So we're gonna see the spec of this. That spec is around 3,000 pages. That entire specification is implemented in the operating system. It's just tip of the iceberg. It's just a spec of the CPU. There are tons of other devices, PCI controllers, USB controllers, you name it. All these devices are inbuilt into the motherboard. It has to be handled by the operating system. So we're going to see the spec of the CPU. Those instruction, those amount of information has to be fed into the operating system. So operating system is pretty complicated that way. All this complication of these devices and CPU and memory, all this thing is handled by the operating system and abstract from end user like us. The single most important concept of operating system is to abstract the complexity of CPU and rest of the hardware from end user. Like I mentioned, CPU has a very big specification, around 3,000 pages, which is handled by the operating system. So these are some of the examples you might have heard: Linux, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, BSD, Unix. Those are the example of operating system. There are so many other operating systems which is not there in the list. In our demo, we gonna install Linux and Windows. In this slide, again, we're gonna look at some of the specification or the spec of CPU which we have installed. So I'm gonna go into this particular link. This is a link from the presentation which we saw, and I have downloaded that PDF here. And as you can see here, this 3,165 pages. This is the AMD 64 architecture, which is the CPU we just installed. And there are 3 documents like this. If you look at the slide, you can see there are 3 different documents like this. I'm not going into the details of it, but I just wanted to show you how big this document is. So this is basically the user manual of the CPU. Someone who want to use that CPU, that small chip we saw yesterday, has to go through this user manual. So an operating system developer has done that. He has done that difficult job, and he has written code for it. This is just tip of the iceberg, like I mentioned. There are so many other chips and devices inside the motherboard, and different devices all should be handled by the operating system.
Question.
Yes.
So does this operating system have specs for a different type of CPU? Like AMD?
So the question is a good question, by the way. The question is basically, does the operating system supports all kind of CPUs? If I rephrase it for you, no. The answer is no. For example, Windows at present supports only AMD 64 and x86 along with ARM. So three types of CPU Windows, in my knowledge, supports. The mainline Windows 10 operating system. On the other hand, Linux supports more wider family of devices and chips. So the operating system has to have code for that particular CPU to work on that CPU. Suppose I developed a new CPU today with new architecture, everything new. It doesn't work on Windows. Windows doesn't understand that particular CPU because its instructions are different. That particular document which I showed you, I need to create an operating system which has that specification. Every operating system, when you install, you will mention what kind of architecture it is and what kind of CPU. So we call it the CPU architecture. So the CPU which we install, it's called Intel x86 or AMD 64 architecture. Both are kind of similar. So another one we use the architecture which are there in the phone is the ARM architecture, ARM, where the Android and iOS runs.
Windows can support ARM?
Windows lately supports ARM, yes. Lately, yeah, Windows 10 does. I don't think Windows 7 does or Vista or any previous operating system. I could be wrong though. I need to check the documentation, but Windows 10 does support ARM. Good question. Yeah.